Salvete! That's how those of us who speak Latin greet each other. What, you ask? There are people who speak Latin today? Yes, there are. I'm going to tell you about it. My name is Luke, and this is Polymathy. Some years ago, one of the first videos I put on this channel, which I call Polymathy, a Greek word meaning the study of many things, I talked about how to learn Latin effectively and why. If you want to see this video, the link's in the description, and I'll put a card up here as well. But today I'm going to tell you another reason why I think it's so interesting and so much fun to learn to speak Latin today. There are many people around the world, in Europe, Asia, and America, and other places that don't include those continents, where people actually gather to speak Latin together. For example, there are famous Conventicula, which are conventions or gatherings, you might say. One of the most famous is in Lexington, Kentucky, and this Conventicum Lexingtoniense, run by Terence Tunberg, a famous Latinist who speaks amazing and beautiful Latin, is one of the most popular and famous and oldest in the world. And then there are others in Italy and in Spain and in many other states in the US. Before I go further, let me dispel the notion that Latin is a dead language. Latin, as far as I know, is not spoken natively by anyone. There's no country that anyone can go to where Latin is spoken by little children all the way through adulthood. So what exactly is the purpose of learning Latin? Well, by learning Latin, we get to appreciate and to understand truly our own European languages. English in particular has been enriched by Latin vocabulary for hundreds of years, as well as those languages in Europe which are descended from Latin. Some of them include Portuguese, Spanish, Catalan, French, Italian, and Romanian, the Romance languages as they're called. And there's others that are Romance languages besides those I mentioned. And all of them are descended from Latin, so knowing Latin allows us to understand them better. So there are lots of practical reasons, but in and of itself, why should we learn Latin? The goal of most Latinists or classicists is to be able to read literature written in Latin, in the original. Caesar's works, Cicero, Ovid, Virgil, and many others from the Roman period, as well as Renaissance, people like Erasmus. There are many, many interesting, fascinating works of literature that are available to us. So if literature is your thing, maybe Latin is your thing too. So the goal is to be able to appreciate the style, the nuances of the original. Now, in my opinion, as a speaker of Latin, the only way to really achieve that is to speak the language. Perhaps not fluently, perhaps only in a broken manner. But if we cannot understand basic conversation, if we are unable to converse with other people who speak Latin, how can we truly appreciate many of the dialogues, plays, conversations that have been written down in this literature? And the answer is we cannot. Unless we have internalized the language, whatever language that is, then we're not able to read the literature and really know what it means. There may be those of you who stumbled upon this video who are actually Latin teachers, but you don't speak Latin yet. And by hearing me say that, unless you speak it, you don't know it, which in Latin is nisi loquaris nescis, well, I very firmly believe that. And if you haven't tried it, maybe you should. Give it a shot. So the goal for all of us who want to really learn Latin, to learn how to speak Latin, is to access ancient, medieval, Renaissance literature even of famous scientists like Galileo Galilei, Isaac Newton, Copernicus, many others. But now, in the 21st century, we have a fascinating new movement. As I mentioned before, there are these conventicula, and sometimes called rusticationes, which are gatherings where people come together to talk about literature, to explore teaching techniques, to do many things, all by means of Latin. But you don't have to attend one of these conventions in order to find people who already speak the language. For example, there are the Latin and Greek weekly chats, the link for which will be in the description, that anybody can attend. Bare beginners through advanced speakers of Latin and ancient Greek are able to come to these Google Hangout gatherings and converse with one another. I've made many friends by doing this, and they're very, very enjoyable. So that's one way to get into this community. And it is a community. It is an entire world of people, of many thousands, tens of thousands of people, by my estimation, who speak Latin with each other on a regular basis in the world. Thanks to the internet, we can find each other and we can converse as regularly as we like. I'd like to talk about the idea of culture, what it is to really cultivate a thing. Now, as speakers of Latin, we are able to enjoy in the original ancient things. And the pleasure in that is that we can access these works from so long ago and feel like they're as fresh and new as anything written today. But new things have been happening. New things are being created. New literature, new songs, new music are all coming into existence now as part of a modern Latin-speaking community, a modern Latin-speaking culture. Any culture has things in common, which, when known by the people in that community, gives them a sense of connection. Popular culture is a vital part of that. For example, in modern American popular culture, many people see the superhero movies, many people know famous singers, many people know comedies, TV shows. We all have these in common. We talk about them around the water cooler. We enjoy seeing them and sharing them together. This gives us an affinity where we can relate to each other based on shared experiences, shared literature, comedy, music. At the forefront of that culture are some outstanding podcasts I would like to recommend. The first and the oldest, as far as I know, is known as Quomodo Dicitur, which is Latin for, how do you say it? And it is run by three outstanding Latin speakers who make weekly podcasts, and they talk about quo libet, whatever. And they have, over the past couple years of their podcast, created a fundamental sense of culture that we Latin speakers enjoy. Running jokes, ideas, and themes that are all part of how we Latinists who speak the language think and how we relate to one another. Let me provide an example. If you've ever seen the sitcom Seinfeld from the 90s, you might know that a lot of the phrases and jokes, one-liners that are used in that show have become a part of modern American culture. For example, that's a shame. People today say that a lot, somewhat with the irony and sarcasm as Jerry Seinfeld. Other Seinfeld quotes you might have heard before include, "No soup for you," and another, "Maybe the dingo ate your baby." And if you've seen the show, it makes you laugh. When a lot of people were watching that show at the time, they were able to relate to each other through this shared sense of humor. And still, those today who remember the show do the same. There are several running jokes in Quomodo Dicitur, and some of them are untranslatable, which is an interesting aspect of culture. If it can't be translated, it's truly part of that language. But one I'll share with you is Raedarii in fossa est, which means the car is in the ditch. And this is a phrase that the three gentlemen of Quomodo Dicitur use towards the end of their podcast to say that, all right, we're going nowhere. The show's getting kind of dry. We should end here. And it has emerged as a phrase in conversations with many Latin speakers. We use this sometimes in person and sometimes in other gatherings. And when we say it, we mean, yeah, this is basically the end of the conversation. Let's wrap it up. And because of that, it's a fun, enjoyable way to end that conversation. It's a fascinating phenomenon, and it's part of our modern Latin-speaking culture. Let me recommend some other regular podcasts to you. One of the next ones to emerge was one by Alexander Veronensis by the name of Sermones Raedarii. Alexander is an Italian who lives in Verona, hence his nickname, Veronensis, which means Veronese. And while he was driving to school where he teaches, he would start recording podcasts. And so for 2 years, he's recorded with a regular basis about every week, a half-hour podcast talking about all sorts of things, teaching techniques in particular. In addition to this popular podcast, Alexander Veronensis has begun creating songs. He sings in Latin with his students, and he teaches us in videos, which I will make available here, how useful it is, how much easier it makes to learn a language through song. And Latin is no exception. And thus, another component of culture, music, is now something that's ours, it's modern, it's new, and it connects to this ancient literature that we enjoy. Other podcasts that I enjoy include Satura Lanx, done by Irene Regini, who is an Italian who speaks beautiful Latin, and she talks about literature and other things. I can also recommend Reginaldus Mercator in Foro Romano and Latinitium. Daniel Pettersson, or I suppose we could call him Daniel Pettersson in English, is one of the best speakers of Latin in the world. And he has an outstanding website called Latinitium.com. And on his website and his podcasts, he has several videos, books, tools, incredible resources for learning and teaching Latin. Another somewhat newer podcast is one that I started with an outstanding friend and colleague named Magister Craft. And this podcast is called Legio XIII, which means 13th Legion, and the link for that will be in the description as well. The final podcast I'll mention today is by Aprilis Albuquerquensis, and her podcast is called Discite Mecum. Aprilis also has a wonderful YouTube channel where she writes melodies to ancient Roman poetry and allows those melodies to accurately give the rhythm of the original Latin poem. I can strongly recommend her channel, as well as the channel of Daniel Pettersson at Latinitium, and also the channel of my friend and colleague Magister Craft, who has a wonderful YouTube channel called Magister Craft. Much of what Magister Craft is famous for is taking Minecraft, and in this video game, he's reconstructed ancient Rome, the entire forum, whole areas of the ancient city, and speaking entirely in Latin, very simple, easy to understand Latin, he guides people through these places that he has recreated. I absolutely love these videos, and so do many students of Latin all around the world who profit from them, including the students of Magister Craft. He creates these with his own students in mind, and people all around the world of all ages who want to learn Latin and hear it and see it and explore it, to live it, can profit from these videos. Another YouTuber I'd like to mention is Beatus Helvetius, a Swiss gentleman who speaks outstanding Latin and does tours and other things in his YouTube channel, which I recommend. All of these, by the way, will be in the description. And finally, for YouTube, Latin stuff, at least what I can mention today, is my own channel, ScorpioMartianus. When I started the channel back more than 10 years ago, mostly I was just doing the news in Latin. I don't do that as much anymore, but I have put recitations of poetry, I talk about the pronunciation of Latin, there are songs in Latin, there are a lot of different things that I do there. Something I really enjoy are my vlogs, my vlogi, as they're called in Latin, at least that's how I call them in that new made-up word. And in these vlogs and tours, I go to other places speaking about the events in Latin, and often, and sometimes when I'm fortunate, I get to speak with other Latin speakers. And it's very enjoyable, I think, to see the reality. And that's sort of what I'm talking about. Why learn Latin? There are lots of reasons. And here's another. there's a community of thousands and thousands of people who are waiting to share the pleasure of speaking this language with you. Everybody is welcome to join this community. If you want to learn the language, you'll find dozens of people quickly who would love to speak with you and to help you practice. And why do we care? Because we're connected to the ancient past as much as we're connected to the present. It gives us a sense of foundation, of community that transcends all national borders. People from all around the world gather together to speak Latin. I have dozens of colleagues and friends, hundreds that I've known and only spoken to in Latin. If you've learned to speak another foreign language before, you've known what it's like to be able to really relate to that foreigner on their own terms and to enjoy the feeling of being a part of their community. Now, as I mentioned and as we know, there is no native country for Latin. It's every country. As much as English is the international language, Latin is too. But this is a different cultural exercise. English is the language of today, of anybody, of everybody. Latin is the language of the past and the present, and for anybody who wants to be a part of it. To compare this to something else, I'm a member of the military, and when people who have served in the military meet each other in civilian contexts, they usually get along right away. And why? Because we've done similar things. We've had similar kinds of training. We understand each other in a way that other people who haven't experienced what we've experienced wouldn't necessarily be able to relate to. And that creates a bond of fraternity. Or, for a completely different example, if you like a bit of popular culture, like, say, Star Trek, then if you meet someone else who does, you can quote things from the shows and the movies. You can discuss topics from those shows which might even relate to your current situations. It allows a sense of a bond. It could be anything. So I have to say that one of my favorite reasons for learning Latin, for learning to speak Latin, the people, the friendships. I'm Luke. I hope you subscribe and share this video. Thanks.